The page of my mind where memory should begin is already stained. I write in the ship's dim chapel because the lumen strips stutter like a nervous pulse, and I want each flicker to mark the rhythm of this entry. If my body is found drifting between hull plates, this record may outlive me. We translate from the warp in total silence. No triumphant clang of anchor runes, no hymns from the astropaths, only a vibration deep in the teeth, like distant turbines grinding bone. The spectre of Varren glides beneath our feet, a stealth corvette clad in sensor-scram hides and prayer-etched armor. Its vox arrays speak only in whispers. The captain, a gaunt woman with an auspex for an eye, mouths the litanies, but dares not raise her voice. Somewhere ahead waits the Ebon Requiem, a Night Lord's strike cruiser whose reputation has long since slid from record into nightmare. My assignment: board under a fragile accord and verify the presence of a relic drawn from a dead shrine world. Officially, it is a joint operation. In truth, the Ordo wants a witness if the 8th Legion has taken something that should not exist. We approach the coordinates given. What manifests is not a beacon in the conventional sense. At first, it appears as a pale blue spark on the auspex. Then the color changes. No, that word is insufficient. It becomes a shade the eye cannot decide upon, blue and black and shrill at once. The bridge crew wince as though struck by a bell. The sound vibrates inside the skull rather than the ears, like a sermon heard underwater. Impossible, the navigator mutters. Astropathic signals do not resonate. Her third eyelid shivers as she adjusts her filters. The Vox pictographs register nothing, yet the beacon's sound color floods the deck like incense. I whisper the Emperor's creed under my breath, but the syllables falter. Each word tastes of copper. The color persists for 7 pulses, then vanishes. Our heading remains fixed. The captain clears her throat, an audible act of defiance, and orders the boarding tube extended. No reply from the Night Lords. No confirmation codes, no docking signals. Only a slow mechanical rotation of their outer lock. Either they expected us, or something wearing their codes did. We file toward the umbilical. My retinue is small, a Mechanicus adept whose limbs tick like tiny clocks. 2 acolytes carrying sealed reliquaries, a sanctioned psyker trembling under a hood of leaded bronze. We move as one through the narrow spine of the spectre of Varren, our boots striking muted notes on the deck. The boarding tube awaits, steel ribs and flex-gasketed walls, smelling faintly of oil and old wax. It should be neutral territory, a sterile corridor bridging 2 warships. Instead, it breathes cold, visible in plumes from our rebreathers. Frost webs the seams. Space should not leak here, yet every breath feels as thin as prayer smoke. The Mechanicus adept clicks a rune rod and murmurs Binharic. Pressure, nominal, he reports, though ice crystals hang in the air. Temperature falling. I glance back at the psyker. Her hands grip the chain of her restraint cuffs. She says nothing, but her eyes, white within white, track some invisible movement along the tube's ceiling. Speak, I command. It's behind the walls, she whispers, scent of murder dreams. The adept's augmetic fingers twitch, recording every utterance. I add a note to my log. Psyker perceives presences within boarding tube. Correlation to beacon unknown. We advance. The tube extends with a groan, magnetic clamps engaging the Ebon Requiem's hull. According to protocol, the Night Lords should initiate handshake codes, then open their lock. But nothing stirs except the thin shriek of cooling metal. I study the viewport slit. Beyond the tube stretches the strike cruiser's armor. Midnight blue burnished almost black, etched with lightning bolts dulled by time. Symbols of Nostramo glare back at me from carved reliefs. Winged predators, inverted suns, flayed faces rendered in steel. Each motif older than the Imperium's memory. Our acolytes murmur litanies of protection. One holds a reliquary high, its glow a faint gold against the frost. I feel the Emperor's presence recede, not through doubt, but through distance, as though the ship itself were a hollow mountain swallowing prayer. The Adept's Auspex pings once. "Lock cycling," he says, his voice cracks. But no signal sent. I look at the indicator panel. Green lights cascade of their own accord. The inner iris begins to rotate, its teeth grinding softly. The Night Lords have not spoken, yet the door opens. My breath fogs the visor. The Psyker stiffens. "They're already here," she whispers. I check the chronometer. We are early by 19 seconds. The ship knew. I set the quill servo to capture my final line for this entry. Airlock cycling without confirmation. Entry granted by unknown agency. Emperor, preserve us. The last lumen strip dies. The iris seals behind us, and the dark inside the Eben Requiem exhales. The corridor that receives us is wider than the schematics promised, its ceiling rising in a shallow vault like the nave of a cathedral built by liars. My boots strike what should be ferrocrete decking, but the sound is muted, as though the metal is lined with muscle. Under the lumen of my helm lamp, the walls ripple between blackened steel and a pale, ossified texture like bone laid in long, careful slabs. The Mechanicus Adept extends his Auspex and mutters Ditacant, but the numbers flicker unreadably and his voice fractures into static. The Night Lords assigned as our escorts wait a few paces ahead, helm lenses glowing faintly cobalt. They do not turn to look at us, nor speak, but drift forward with a predatory patience that makes our footsteps seem like an intrusion. I run my glove along a bulkhead, half to steady myself, half to test reality. The surface feels cold and dry, but the grooves beneath my fingers are not tool marks. They are claw scratches, shallow and precise, forming the outline of a winged predator devouring a kneeling figure. Every meter, another image repeats in variations. Inverted saints, heads bowed, entrails spilling into stylized lightning bolts. The Psyker keeps her hood down over her eyes and breathes through clenched teeth. Her cuffs rattle softly with each tremor. The corridor forks without warning. According to the ship's blueprint I studied aboard the Spectre of Varan, this deck should be a straight run of 70 meters into a cargo junction. Yet the junction now lies at least twice that distance away, glimpsed through shifting shadows. Gravity remains stable, but my inner ear feels as though we are walking a slow curve. The Adept's Auspex beeps and resets its distance counter 3 times. "Spatial variance detected," he whispers, as if afraid the ship itself might overhear. Ahead, the Night Lords pass beneath a broken lumen strip. Their armor swallows light in a way no pigment should. Shoulder plates bear flayed faces stitched on with wire, lips still moving in a soundless moan. One carries a chain of votive tags engraved with dates and locations, each a terror campaign on some forgotten world. None of them look back. None of them speak. The silence becomes its own kind of liturgy, punctuated only by the hiss of our rebreathers and the distant groan of the vessel. We pass a service arch open to a maintenance shaft. Inside hangs a curtain of chains, each link inscribed with numerals in Nostraman script. They sway although no air moves. The Psyker's head tilts slightly, listening. "They're counting backwards," she murmurs. "I don't know from what." The Adept pretends not to hear, focusing on his console, but his hands tremble enough to make the runes blur. Another corridor, another widening. The decks stretch farther. Doors that should be opposite each other now stand staggered. I realize the lumen pattern forms a jagged line like a hunting mark leading us deeper. My acolyte clutches his reliquary tighter. I whisper a line from the Canticle of Warding, but the words fall flat against the walls as though swallowed. We enter what should be a refectory, but now resembles an ossuary. Long tables bolted to the deck are carved from the same bone metal as the walls, surfaces etched with names in high Gothic, followed by small, neat sketches of execution poses. The air smells faintly of scorched parchment and cold iron. I order the team to keep moving, to mark the path, but the Vox static hums louder than our footsteps. A faint tremor passes through the deck, like a heartbeat. The lumen strips flare blue for a single breath and then return to white. The psyker gasps, her restraints tighten on their own with a metallic creak. Something is watching, she says, but when I follow her gaze there is only the smooth curve of the bulkhead and the shifting of our own shadows. The adept stops, scanning. Dimensional displacement now at 15%, he says. We are walking more distance than exists. He flicks open a slate showing a schematic of Deck 7, the cargo approach. We should already be at the junction. Instead, the map redraws itself into a spiral. He makes a sign of the cog and closes it. We push on. The Night Lords halt before a sealed blast door, marked with lightning bolts and a winged skull. One raises a gauntleted hand to a rune plate. It glows faintly, and the door hisses open. Inside is a short hall, ending in another bulkhead. At first glance, it appears empty. Then our vox links crackle. It is not a sound, but a voice laid over static. My own name, spoken in crisp high Gothic, syllable by syllable, as if read from a list. The psyker stiffens. The adept's name follows, then the acolyte's, then hers. No direction, no source. Just the bulkhead ahead, blank and unmarked, except for faint claw etchings like script too small to read. We freeze. My heart thuds in my ears. The vox crackles again, repeating the sequence slower, lingering on the last syllable like a breath in a crypt. The Night Lords stand motionless, lenses turned back toward us at last. In their reflection, I see my own face pale under the helm lamp, mouth open, but no sound coming out. I cut the vox channel, but the whisper continues, now inside the helmet, bypassing every seal. The bulkhead's claw etchings seem to crawl slightly, arranging themselves into letters I almost recognize. The psyker begins to pray in a voice so low it trembles the air. I raise my quill servo to record, but the display shows a blank screen, as if nothing is happening. The adept snaps his auspex shut. No source, he says. No emitter. His hands shake. We take one step closer to the bulkhead. The whisper stops. The silence that follows feels heavier than the ship's gravity. The Night Lords move again without a word, as if this moment meant nothing to them, and lead us onward. I glance back once more. The claw etchings have returned to random scarring, but I can still feel my name echoing just behind my eyes, like a promise made by something that has not yet shown its face. I kept my log running as our escort guided us through yet another spine of the Eben Requiem. The lumen here was low and amber, throwing everything into a cathedral gloom. Only the faint blue eyes of the Night Lords ahead of us punctuated the darkness. My stylus scratched steadily across the data slate as I formalized, in bureaucratic phrasing, the real reason for my presence: to verify the rumors of a forbidden relic taken from a dead shrine world. The Ordo Hereticus had been denied access 3 times before. The 8th Legion had offered only silence and veiled threats. Now, under a brittle arrangement of mutual convenience, I was to see it with my own eyes, record its nature, and, if necessary, call in sanction. Even writing the words felt like scratching a warning into a coffin lid. The ship vibrated faintly underfoot. Not the steady thrum of engines, but a slower pulse, like the breathing of an animal half asleep. Each time it rolled through the deck, my acolyte's reliquary chimed against his chest, as though struck. I remembered the psyker's murmur back in the boarding tube, behind the walls, and my skin crawled beneath my robes. We were moving, yes, but toward what? The escort brought us to a vast chamber shaped like an inverted amphitheater. Benches of black iron rose in tiers around a central dais, lit by a single shaft of blue-white light. In that light stood the exalted champion of the Night Lords. His presence was less a sight than an impact. The armor was midnight and lightning, edged in sigils that pulsed faintly like capillaries. Across his pauldrons and breastplate hung faces, not leather masks, not trophies, but the actual skin of unknown victims, still twitching, eyes half open as if caught between scream and prayer. They did not rot. They moved when he breathed. He did not bow or greet us. He simply stared through his helm lenses until we arranged ourselves at the edge of the dais. My acolyte tried to kneel. I stopped him with a hand. Protocol meant nothing here. This was a performance of power, not a meeting. I began the formal address, my voice echoing too loudly in the chamber. By writ of the Ordo Hereticus, under seal Sigma 8, I am charged with verification of artifacts removed from consecrated ground without sanction. This audience. He raised one gauntlet, and the air thickened, as if a pressure door had sealed. His vox grill emitted a low growl that unfolded into words. It was not low Gothic. It was a litany that sounded like a dirge stripped of music, each phrase a blade drawn slowly from a sheath. With every line, my weight shifted. The deck seemed to tilt upward, then downward. My stylus floated off the slate for a heartbeat before clattering back. Gravity had faltered. The champion's chant ended on a syllable, like the snap of a snare. My stomach lurched as normal weight returned. He tilted his head slightly, studying us as if measuring fear. "Your writ," he said at last. "We accept." For now, the voices of the faces across his chest whispered the same word an instant later. For now. I swallowed hard, aware of how dry my mouth had become. The artifact is said to be a relic of Nostramo recovered from the shrine world of Threxian 9, I managed. The Ordo requires confirmation of its condition and containment. The champion's helm tilted again. "You are not the first to require," he said, voice like metal dragged over teeth. "But you may be the last to record." He turned, motioning to one of the silent escorts. The giant stepped forward and presented a data slate of coordinates. "Cargo hold Theta 7, the champion said. "Your Mechanicus may measure, your Psyker may weep. We will not be delayed." His gauntlet closed around the beep air as if around an invisible throat. "This vessel feeds on time, little scribe. Every breath you take is already counted." The words struck harder than a threat. I felt them in my bones, a low resonance that made my vision blur for a second. Around the dais, the benches of black iron seemed to stretch upward like fangs. The blue-white shaft of light dimmed slightly, taking colour from everything around it. My acolyte muttered a prayer under his breath. The Psyker swayed, her cuffs chiming softly. I forced myself to nod, recording his statement word for word. "We will proceed at your leave," I said. He gave no reply, only turned away. The faces across his armour shifted, eyes rolling upward as if scenting something above us. The escort gestured for us to follow. Back in the corridor, my hands shook as I keyed a private channel to the Mechanicus Adept. "Begin immediate scans," I whispered. "We may not have long." He clicked acknowledgement, voice flat but trembling at the edges. "Already running deck geometry diagnostics," he said. "Results. Inconsistent." We walked in silence for several meters, the sound of our boots swallowed by the ship's pulse. Then his voice burst suddenly across all our vox links, sharper and louder than protocol allowed. "Interrogator!" Geometry drift detected around cargo hold Theta 7, bulkheads shifting, no stable perimeter. The message repeated once, then cut to static. Ahead, the corridor bent where it should have been straight. The Night Lords did not slow. I tightened my grip on the stylus and felt the data slate shake under my palm. This ship was not merely moving, it was feeding, reshaping itself around whatever we had come to see. My mandate felt suddenly less like an assignment and more like an epitaph. We moved downward through a service shaft that seemed to coil like a living thing rather than run straight as the schematics claimed. Each step rang dull on the grated stair, the echo dampened as though the air had grown thick. The lumen orbs along the wall flickered at uneven intervals, leaving stretches of black between islands of pale light. I counted each landing to steady myself. 1, 2, 3. But the number of turns exceeded what should exist. Even the Mechanicus Adept stopped marking runes and simply muttered calculations under his breath like a penance. Ahead, The Night Lords descended without pause, their boots silent despite their weight. The air grew colder as we dropped. Frost formed in the seams of my gloves and clung to the Psyker's hood like silver dust. Her breaths came shallow and quick, hands clenched at her chain cuffs as though she might fly apart. When we finally reached the hold level, the hatch was already open, its edges rimed with a thin crust of black ice. Beyond lay a cavernous space, dimly lit by a lattice of violet lumen strips. I smelled iron and incense, and something like the tang of distant lightning. The hold center was marked by an octagon of chained pylons forming a shrine unlike anything I had seen. Each pylon bore alternating runes of the Mechanicus and the Nostraman script, their lines inverted so that my eyes struggled to follow them. Within the octagon floated a stasis field faintly opalescent, humming not with energy, but with layered voices singing backward. The hymn crawled across the inner ear, phrases from the ecclesiarchy reversed into something that still carried weight, but none of its grace. Even the Night Lords hesitated a fraction at its edge. Ringed around the shrine stood servitors, dozens of them, locked in poses of prayer or supplication. They were pale as tallow, brass grafts protruding from their spines like altar spikes. Each had both eyes open but perfectly still, unblinking, like dolls placed on watch. No breath, no tremor, no flick of servo limbs. I stepped closer and felt the cold deepen until my teeth ached. I raised my pick feed, thumbed the rune to begin recording. For a moment the screen showed what I expected. The shrine, the servitors, the faint glow of the field. Then static flared, and the image warped. A figure appeared in the feed, walking a step behind me, robes identical to mine, head bent over a data slate. It was not one of my team. The camera's lens registered its movement perfectly, yet the air around me was empty. I turned sharply. Only my acolyte stood there, clutching his reliquary, eyes wide at my sudden motion. "Interrogator?" he asked. "Nothing," I lied. My heart thudded hard enough to shake my breath. I aimed the picked feed again. The image behind me still moved, this time closer, head lifting as if to meet my gaze through the screen. Its face was mine, pale and tired, lips moving in a whisper I could not hear. I lowered the device and looked with my own eyes. Nothing. Only the shrine, humming backward, and the silent servitors. The Mechanicus adept circled the perimeter with his auspex extended, runes scrolling wildly. "Readings unstable," he said flatly. "Field oscillating between 3 and 4 spatial anchors. Power source, not of Mechanicus origin." His augmetic fingers twitched as though resisting the urge to draw a sign of the cog. The Psyker stepped closer to the edge of the octagon until her cuffs rattled against the invisible field. She tilted her head as though listening to something inside. "It's singing to itself," she whispered. "Or to what it remembers." She shuddered and stepped back. I tried to resume my notes, but the stylus felt heavy, as if dipped in lead. The hymn from the shrine crawled into my pulse. Each phrase struck not my ears but my chest, echoing in time with my heartbeat. The servitor's eyes followed nothing and yet seemed fixed on me. A Night Lord moved to stand beside me, armor creaking softly. He gestured at the shrine, but did not speak. The faces stitched to his shoulder plate shifted faintly, eyes fluttering open for an instant before sealing again. I thought of the champion's words, "This vessel feeds on time," and felt the tick of an unseen clock just behind my ribs. My acolyte crossed himself and whispered a prayer to the Emperor. The sound came out backwards. He clapped his hand over his mouth, eyes watering. I wanted to order him out, but my throat felt locked. I turned one more time, hoping to catch the shadow from the picked feed with my bare eyes. Nothing but cold air. Yet when I lifted the device, the figure behind me now stood at my shoulder, head bowed, its lips moving in perfect sync with the backward hymn. The Mechanicus adept's voice burst over Vox, breaking the spell. "Interrogator." Geometry drift increasing around the shrine, pylons shifting, no fixed containment. His words echoed off the walls with a faint delay, As though spoken twice, the hymn changed pitch. At first subtle, then unmistakable, it matched the rhythm of my pulse exactly, one note for each beat, accelerating as my heart did. The servitor's open eyes glistened with a faint film of frost. I realized I was clenching the stylus so hard it cut my palm. The feed went dark. I shut it off, drawing a ragged breath. "Log entry suspended," I whispered, though I knew the system would not hear me. Around us the violet light pulsed once, twice, keeping time with the new hymn. Something inside the octagon shifted, a shape I could not resolve, like a memory waiting to be born. My name echoed soundlessly behind my eyes, and still the hymn beat on, perfectly aligned to the hammering in my chest. I set up my station in what should have been a simple archive cell, but felt instead like a mortuary disguised as a library. Rows of data slates were mounted in racks carved from black iron and bone-colored struts. Each slate bore a strip of tanned leather at its spine, inscribed with lightning bolts and faint script. The lumen globes overhead pulsed a weak blue, too dim to banish the shadows pooling between the racks. The Night Lords had withdrawn, leaving me with my acolyte, the Psyker, and the Mechanicus Adept. Somewhere beyond the bulkheads, the octagonal shrine hummed on, and its backward hymn still rang in my ears, even though I had left the hold. I activated the first slate. No access codes, no encryption, just a rolling list of names and worlds. I scrolled downward, expecting after-action reports or victory tallies. Instead, I found dates. Dates not in the past, but in the days, months, and decades ahead. The first entry, an administratum prelate on Idumea scheduled to die 2 weeks from now. Another, an Arbeits High Marshal listed for execution 3 years hence. Page after page, each name accompanied by coordinates and a single sigil, 8-8-8, burned into the margin like a watermark. I frowned and cross-checked against my own Ordo files. These were not prisoners already in Night Lord's custody. Many were Imperial citizens in good standing, some highly protected. Yet here they were, names catalogued under the Murder Index, a title scrolling faintly across the slate's top edge. I felt as though I had opened a prophecy written in blood rather than a record. The Mechanicus Adept hissed softly through his respirator. "This is impossible," he said. "Data cannot exist for events not yet occurred." He tapped runes to trace the source, but the slate displayed no origin node, only a looping glyph like a 3-winged bat. His augmetic fingers twitched faster, Binharik spilling from his vox slit in anxious bursts. Behind us, the Psyker's breath quickened. "They're not records," she whispered. "They're invitations." I ignored her and kept scrolling. The farther down I went, the stranger the entries became. Names of whole cities rather than individuals. Coordinates written in cipher but pulsing faintly as if alive. And always the sigil. 8-8-8. It seared the retina like an afterimage. My acolyte returned from a neighboring rack, pale and shaking. "Interrogator, some of the slates, they're blank now." I crossed quickly to his side. The slates he pointed to showed nothing but a grey haze. Then, as I watched, faint script bled upward through the haze, new names writing themselves letter by letter. He stumbled back, clutching his reliquary, lips moving in prayer. Somewhere above, a muffled clang echoed, followed by silence. No alarm, no vox alert. The Mechanicus Adept looked up, augmetic eyes narrowing. "Crew displacement detected," he murmured. "Life signs vanishing between decks. No transit logs." His voice stayed low, but his hands shook as he scanned. I felt the cold deepen. The index in my hand had reached the H section. I turned another page. There, in crisp High Gothic, was my own name, Interrogator Scribe Ardent Vale, listed with a date that was not a date, but a sequence of inverted numerals. Location, Ibon Requiem. Status, pending. The sigil burned beneath it, brighter than before. My vision blurred. I tried to steady my breath, but the hymn from the shrine seemed to have followed me here, curling around my heartbeat. I scrolled further, desperate, as though looking could undo it. Names of my acolyte, the Psyker, even the Mechanicus adept, appeared several entries later, all marked with the same inverted numerals. Scheduled deaths within a time frame the ship itself defined. I whispered a litany of protection under my breath and forced my stylus to scratch notes onto my slate. These cannot be prophecies, I told myself. They are threats. Psychological warfare. Yet the writing did not feel like a threat. It felt like a schedule being kept. A sound interrupted me, soft at first, like cloth tearing. I turned. Several slates along the wall had gone dark. From the corner of my eye, I saw shapes flicker between the racks, blue-eyed silhouettes that left no footfalls. The Psyker pressed herself against the bulkhead, restraints rattling. "They're taking them," she hissed. "Names first, then bodies." Another clang above, then silence. The Mechanicus Adept's Auspex flickered and died. "No crew left in this section," he said flatly. "All life signs lost." The acolyte gripped his reliquary until his knuckles whitened. "We should leave, Interrogator. We're not safe." I wanted to agree, but my hands kept moving, scrolling, compelled to reach the end. The sigil 8-8-8 began to pulse on every page like a heartbeat. The hymn in my ears grew louder. At last I reached an entry without a name, but a single word in ornate High Gothic. Unborn. Scheduled time. Now. The bulkhead above our heads vibrated. Then, through the ventilation shafts, a cry echoed. A newborn's cry, thin and high, impossibly close, as if an infant were hidden within the ductwork. The sound rose and fell, matching the pulse of the glowing sigil on the slate. My acolyte clapped his hands over his ears. The Psyker dropped to her knees, whispering fragments of reversed prayers. The Mechanicus Adept stared upward, augmetic eyes widening as if to see through the metal. I held the slate tighter, my own name still burning on its screen, and listened as the infant's cry lingered in the vents above us, a sound with no source, yet already written here in the murder index. We found the chapel by accident, or rather, it found us. The corridor we followed should have led to a maintenance hub, but the walls seemed to bend inwards as we walked, the deck narrowing, the air growing colder. My Auspex had been useless since the murder index. The Mechanicus Adept had stopped even pretending to calibrate it, and now simply clutched it like a talisman. When the bulkhead at the end slid open of its own accord, a gust of air rolled out that smelled of old incense and scorched iron. We stepped through into a space that should not exist within the ship's layout, a nave carved into the hull's heart, unseen by any blueprint, a sanctuary built for fear. The ceiling arched high above, lined with black ribs like the inside of some titanic carcass. Statues of winged predators stood along both walls, inverted, so their clawed feet gripped the ceiling, and their heads hung down, eyes carved wide. Thin rivulets of light bled from those eyes like molten silver, dripping into bowls that smoked, but gave off no heat. The floor was a mosaic of stylized executions and screaming faces, each tile set with surgical precision, the whole pattern radiating out from a central altar shaped like a bat's skull. The blue glow from the Night Lord's eyes cast the statues into deeper shadows until the predators seemed ready to spring. I tried to log the scene, but my stylus refused to scratch, the slate's surface slick as ice. My acolyte murmured a prayer and clutched his reliquary close. The Psyker kept her head bowed, whispering an unending string of syllables I could not follow. Only the Mechanicus Adept moved with purpose, stepping forward to examine the altar. His Auspex jittered in his grip, runes cascading too fast to read. He began to recite a Binharic litany, his voice the flat mechanical chant of the machine god's supplication. One by one, the lumen strips along the walls extinguished. First the farthest, then the next, like a predator closing its eyes to pounce. Darkness pooled at our feet. The only illumination came from the faint, bleeding light of the statue's eyes and the steady, predatory glow of the legionaries' helms. They stood like pillars on either side of the nave, motionless, silent, their presence heavier than the air. The adept's chant faltered, then picked up faster, syllables clashing as he tried to finish. His auspex screeched and sparked. Suddenly he arched backward, vox slit opening in a strangled cry. Foam bubbled from his mouth and dripped onto the mosaic floor, hissing as though on hot metal. His augmetic fingers clawed at his own throat, cables snapping, as if something inside the litany had answered back. My acolyte lunged to catch him, but the adept convulsed once, twice, and collapsed, limbs still twitching. I knelt to check for a pulse, but his chest was cold and rigid, breath gone. His eyes were wide and staring, but full of static, as though two picked feeds were overlaid. When I lifted my gaze, I saw movement above us. Not the statues, but a deeper shadow perched between the inverted wings, a patch of black darker than the surrounding dark. It had no outline I could hold, shifting like smoke caught in a jar, yet I sensed it was crouched and watching. It cast no shadow of its own. The psyker whimpered, pressing her forehead to the floor. My acolyte raised the reliquary high, its faint glow trembling in his hands. The Night Lords did not move or speak, but I felt them watching too, lenses turned slightly upward. I should have ordered a retreat, should have dragged my team back into the corridor, but I could not look away from the thing above us. My breath fogged inside my mask. The statue's bleeding light slowed until each drop fell in time with my heartbeat. Then the shadow moved. Not with a leap or a glide, but by simply being nearer, its shape resolving just enough for me to see the suggestion of a head cocked at my angle, like a carrion bird listening for death. In the silence that followed the adept's collapse, a voice slid down from the rafters, my own voice, unmistakable, dry and strained, speaking a single word. Leave. It was not loud. It was not a shout. It was my voice spoken as a verdict, carrying the cold certainty of something already decided. The reliquary's glow flickered out. All that remained was the blue gleam of the legionary's eyes and the weight of my own echo telling me to flee. The hold had become colder since our last descent, as though every corridor we passed through was a vein pulling warmth into the heart of the ship. Frost clung to the edges of the octagonal shrine. The servitors stood exactly as before, unblinking, yet I could feel some change in them. A faint tension in the air around their stillness. The hymn inside the field no longer ran backward, but looped in short fragments, snatches of words that cut off mid-syllable like swallowed cries. My acolyte refused to step closer, holding his reliquary at arm's length, as if it might burn him. Even the Night Lords paused at the threshold, lenses dimmed as though filtering something unseen. I forced myself forward, with the Mechanicus adept at my side. His auspex rattled softly, its runes cascading nonsense. He muttered Binharik under his breath, but his voice lacked conviction. The psyker trailed behind, hood drawn low, whispering to herself in broken Nostraman. Each step toward the shrine felt like a descent into a deeper layer of something watching. We had not been told what the relic was. That was the point of this mission: observe, classify, record. But as the field flickered, I began to see glimpses through the opalescent shimmer. Not a weapon, not an icon of glory, but a shard of black stone carved into a jagged bat-winged shape, etched with thousands of tiny scratches like tally marks. Around its edges, motes of light swirled, each pulse in time with the beating of a heart. The Mechanicus adept hissed sharply and crossed the sign of the cog. Pre-compliance era, he murmured. Pattern Nostramo. Prescribed the psyker, stopped moving. It's older, she whispered. It remembers the dark before their Primarch. Memories of the hunted, she raised her head, and for the first time her eyes were visible, white within white, reflecting the relic's glow. It's feeding, Her words slid into my mind like a blade. The ship's corridors, too long, too curved, walls etched with terror, were not random. They were ambush paths, hunting runs. The relic was not just a trophy. It was a seed of nostrum and terror planted into the Aben Requiem, rewriting its spaces into a maze of fear. Every turn we had taken since boarding had been part of its pattern, preparing us as prey. I thumbed my Vox rune to transmit a warning back to the spectre of Varen. Static hissed, then a burst of sound. Not my voice, not even reversed speech, but the thin, high wailing of a child. A moment later, another voice joined, a younger version of myself screaming. I shut the channel and tried again on a secure frequency. This time, the Vox played back my own words from years ago, recorded during interrogation training, every confession and every fear pulled out and fed back to me. My hands trembled on the controls. "Vox compromised," I managed to say aloud, though my voice felt detached. "Do not transmit further." The Mechanicus adept crouched at the edge of the field, scanning. "Stasis failing," he whispered. "Anchor runes deforming." Frost bloomed across his augmetics like lichen. The servitors twitched imperceptibly, eyelids fluttering once before stilling again. I stepped closer, compelled to look. Through the shimmer, the relic seemed larger, its etchings moving like insects. A noise rose in my ears, footsteps behind me, slow and deliberate. I turned sharply, no one there, only the Night Lord standing at the periphery, helms turned slightly inward, silent as statues. Yet I could feel the presence behind me like a breath on the back of my neck. The hymn inside the field shifted again. Words emerged, then dissolved. Names, coordinates, my own voice whispering things I had never said. The air thickened. My acolyte staggered back, reliquary clanging against the deck. The psyker pressed her palms to her temples. "It's calling its phantoms," she gasped. "It's making them from us." Something moved at the edge of my vision. In the far corner of the hold, the bulkhead seemed to ripple, unfolding into a shadowed corridor that had not been there a moment before. Beyond it lay nothing but darkness and the faint echo of running feet. Another corridor yawned open on the opposite side, curving into a spiral lined with claw marks. The ship was rearranging itself, shaping ambush routes for prey that had not yet fled. I forced my eyes back to the relic and raised my pict feed, hoping to capture proof. The screen flickered and filled with a moving image of myself standing where I stood, but gaunter, eyes sunken, lips moving in a silent scream. Behind that figure shapes crowded, winged and eyeless, closing in. I lowered the device, but the air around me was empty. My hands shook as I keyed a code into the slate, trying to lock a message into encrypted storage. Relic is a fragment of a pre-heresy terror totem. Feeding on fear. Ship spatially unstable. Immediate quarantine recommended. The words blurred even as I wrote them, letters melting on the screen. The hymn's pitch climbed, aligning with my heartbeat. Every note pressed against my ribs. My pulse raced, and the sound sped with it. The Mechanicus adept dropped his auspex. It clattered across the deck and slid to a stop at the psyker's feet. She bent to pick it up, but froze, staring upward. One of the Night Lords had stepped forward, breaking formation. He loomed a head taller than the rest, lightning sigils crawling across his armor like living veins. Without a word, he reached up and disengaged the seals of his helm. The sound echoed like a blade being drawn. He lifted the helmet free and the smell of cold stone poured out. I stared. The face beneath was not scarred or painted like a terror mask. It was my own features, my own eyes, pale and still, lips curved in a hint of something between amusement and hunger. The psyker whimpered. My acolyte stumbled back against a servitor that did not move. For a heartbeat, the hymn fell silent, leaving only the rush of blood in my ears and the faint scrape of the Night Lord's gauntlets on his helm. Then, my doppelganger opened its mouth, showing teeth just slightly too sharp, and inhaled as if tasting my fear. The corridors beyond the hold shifted again, closing like a Predator's jaws and the opalescent field around the relic flared once in time with my racing pulse. We lurched out of the warp into silence so absolute it seemed to press against the inside of my skull. The Ebon Requiem drifted above a grey-white moon that no chart named, its surface veined with canyons like claws dragged across ash. The transition should have been smooth, but the Geller field flickered for a fraction of a heartbeat, long enough for every lumen on the deck to dim and the ship to shudder as though exhaling. When the stabilizers steadied, a smell like charred parchment seeped through the ventilation, acrid and sweet, clinging to the back of the throat. It took me a moment to realize it was condensation dripping from the ceiling in slow, viscous beads. The hull was weeping, its cold sweat gathering into runnels that smoked faintly as they hit the deck. Crew began to whisper of visions, even before we completed the post-transition rituals. An armsman staggered past our group, eyes wide, babbling about a woman he'd executed on Paramar 5 years ago, saying she had stood beside his bunk during the translation and smiled at him with a throat full of black feathers. Another knelt in a corner, tearing at his own armor plates, begging someone to stop a child's crying, only he could hear. The Night Lords watched these breakdowns without comment, lenses unreadable, moving among their crew like predators among carrion. Whatever was happening, they were accustomed to it, or they welcomed it. I tried to focus on my slate, but the words swam. Between one blink and the next, the data screen filled with images I had never recorded. A tribunal docked in shadows, a man bound to a chair, my own hands raising a needle full of clear liquid. Another blink, me signing an execution order for a city I had never visited. Another, me watching a Hablok burn while reciting a prayer of absolution. The faces of the dead flickered in the corner of my vision like candle flames. When I shook my head to clear it, the smell of burnt parchment only grew stronger. The Mechanicus adept clung to his auspex like a drowning man, running scan after scan. Field effect expanding beyond containment, he rasped. Residual warp signature integrated with hull plating. No stable perimeter, his augmetic eyes flickered from blue to green and back again. It is feeding on them. It is feeding on us. The Psyker crouched against the bulkhead, nails scratching at the deck. Memories, she whispered. It hunts with memories. It feeds them back until you believe them. She rocked slightly, repeating the phrase as though it might anchor her. My acolyte held his reliquary to her forehead, but she flinched as though burned. Outside the viewport, the uncharted moon hung motionless. Its surface seemed to ripple faintly, but the auspex registered no atmosphere. The canyons glimmered like glass under a dead sun. I found myself leaning closer, compelled by a sense that something down there recognized me. For an instant, a reflection moved across the moon's face. A figure shaped like me, arms outstretched, mouth open in a silent call. Then it was gone. I pulled back sharply and forced myself to speak into my log. Post-warp emergence, uncharted planetoid, hull excreting condensation with olfactory profile matching scorched parchment, crew reporting hallucinations of past kills. My voice sounded hollow even to me. I glanced at the Mechanicus adept. Confirm hull integrity. Nominal, he said, then corrected himself. Changing. His auspex whined. Material density fluctuating at micro level. Hull composition not fixed. A tremor rolled through the deck. Drops of condensation fell from the ceiling and landed on my slate, leaving brownish stains like aged ink. My hand shook as I wiped them away. Another flash crossed my vision. Me on a dark street in Nostramo, blade in hand, someone kneeling before me. I knew it wasn't mine, yet I felt the satisfaction of the kill, the warmth of blood on my palms. The memory dissolved, leaving only nausea. The Night Lords began to murmur among themselves, low vox bursts like predator calls. One tilted his helm toward me, as if measuring my reaction. Another dragged a finger through the condensation on the bulkhead and brought it to his vox grill, tasting it like a sommelier of fear. Their casualness sickened me more than the visions. We moved toward a nearby observation blister to get clearer readings. The corridor leading there had stretched again. Doors farther apart, shadows deeper. The ship's hum no longer came from engines but from everywhere at once, a sound like wings beating underwater. My acolyte whispered that the lumen strips overhead formed a hunting pattern just as in the shrine. I told him to be quiet, but secretly I saw it too. In the blister, the view was clearer. The moon rolled below us, grey and silent, but the void around the ship was not empty. The Mechanicus Adept's auspex began to tick irregularly, registering masses where nothing should be. Multiple contacts, he muttered. No thermal, no void signature. Moving in synchronous orbit. He adjusted filters. The runes scrambled. They're not ships. They're not debris. I pressed my forehead to the viewport, eyes straining. At first, there was only black. Then, as my pupils adjusted, shapes emerged. Scores, perhaps hundreds of vast silhouettes wheeling slowly around the Eben Requiem. Each had the outline of a bat or angel with wings spread impossibly wide, bodies thin as shadows, no thrusters, no lights. They moved as if swimming through vacuum, gliding in long arcs that formed a spiral around the ship. When they tilted, I glimpsed no faces, only hollows where eyes should be. My breath misted on the glass. "Auspex confirmation?" I asked, though I already knew. The adept swallowed hard. "Confirmed. Impossible mass detected outside hull. Pattern consistent. With flocking behavior," his voice cracked. "They're circling us like prey." Behind me, the Psyker began to weep softly, rocking back and forth. The condensation on the walls thickened into rivulets, streaking downward like ink on a manuscript, carrying with it the smell of burned prayers. My acolyte tightened his grip on the reliquary until his knuckles whitened. I tried to open a vox channel to the spectre of Varan again, but the speaker hissed and spat only a child's laugh. Then my own voice whispered from it, low and intimate. Too late. I shut it off with a shudder. Outside, the flock of giant bats tightened its spiral. Their wings moved in perfect rhythm, each beat slower than a heartbeat, like a great net drawing closed. For a moment, one passed close to the viewport. It left no shadow on the glass, but my reflection flickered, my face overlaid with something winged and eyeless, mouth open in a silent scream. The Mechanicus Adept's auspex emitted a long, rising tone like a scream and then cut to static. He turned to me, augmetic eyes wide. "Interrogator," he said. "They're not in the void. They're in the hull." I looked back at the condensation bleeding from the ceiling, at the shapes beyond the glass, at the moon with its clawed canyons waiting below, and felt the terror totem's influence stretch its wings around us. The Eben Requiem had become its hunting ground, and now the predators it had called were circling, ready to feed. The data chamber was colder than any place aboard the Eben Requiem I had yet entered, a vault of flickering hollow screens, suspended above a pit of cables and dripping condensation. Every console exhaled a thin mist smelling of scorched parchment. The ship's weeping had penetrated here too, forming brownish beads that trembled on the edges of rune panels before falling into the dark. I stood hunched over the primary telemetry altar, the Mechanicus Adept at my side, my acolyte and the Psyker waiting behind me like shadows. We had sealed the doors with a triple litany of warding, but the Night Lords had not tried to stop us. Perhaps they wanted us to see, perhaps they no longer cared. I forced my fingers to stillness and began pulling feeds from every sensor array the ship possessed. Auspex, life sign monitors, internal pict feeds, exterior auger sweeps, all poured into a single lattice of flickering green glyphs. What emerged was a map, not of corridors and bulkheads, but of living echoes. Human shapes traced in ghostly light, moving along impossible paths, intersecting, dissolving, reforming. Every phantom matched a data point from the murder index. Dates, coordinates, names. I selected one at random, a magistrate from Idumea listed for execution next month, and the phantom's outline sharpened, showing a hunched figure, trailing ink-dark blood across a deck where no one currently walked. Another glyph highlighted a child scheduled for death in 30 years. Its echo scurried through a ventilation duct, vanishing when I tried to zoom. The ship had become a theatre where killings not yet committed played out as practice runs. "This is correlation," I whispered. "Each anomaly, each sighting, directly mirrors an entry in the index." The Mechanicus Adept's augmetic eyes clicked as they refocused. "Not mirrors," he murmured. "Preparations. The totem is not only feeding, it is rehearsing." His auspex showed currents of warp energy threading through the hull like veins. "It is writing the murders before they occur." I switched to an exterior view, hoping to escape the interior madness. The moon below filled the display, grey surface cross-hatched with canyons. At first glance, nothing new. Then the glyphs brightened and aligned. From this altitude, the trenches formed not random scars, but a pattern, a colossal winged skull surrounded by lightning bolts, the sigil of the 8th Legion carved into the crust of a world no chart named. No construction logs, no landing records, no seismic traces of excavation. It had always been there, waiting for us, as if the moon itself were a memory of Nostromo projected into matter. My breath fogged the screen. The Psyker moaned softly, clutching her restraints. A rasping voice from the shadows startled me. "You see it too." I spun. In the far corner of the chamber, a figure knelt in chains, power-armoured but stripped of heraldry, wrists bound by glowing manacles, helm removed to reveal a gaunt face scarred with devotion marks of the Imperial Creed. A loyalist Astartes, one of the prisoners I had glimpsed on the manifests, but never in person. His eyes burned with a feverish light. "They will not explain it," he said, "but I know. I have felt it crawl across my dreams. The bat totem is older than their legion. It hunts the guilty and the innocent alike. It is Nostromo's curse made flesh." He leaned forward as far as his chains allowed. "I can guide you through it. I know the paths that shift. But you must release me." I hesitated. Every instinct screamed that he was a danger. But the corridors had grown labyrinthine, closing behind us, and the map in front of me changed even as I watched. "If I free you," I said slowly, "you will take us to the relic. You will help us contain it." "I will take you where it wants you to go," he said, and bared his teeth in something like a smile. "Containment is a lie, only escape." The Mechanicus Adept hissed a warning. "Interrogator, this is unwise. Data shows extreme contamination of subjects' neural pathways." I ignored him. "Why should I trust you?" The Marine's eyes met mine. "Because you are already part of it. You have seen your name in the index. You feel crimes that are not yours. You are prey in its memory maze, just as I am. And prey must run together or die alone." My acolyte whispered a prayer. The Psyker's hood slipped back. Her white eyes were fixed on the prisoner with something like recognition. "He's not lying," she said. "But he's not free either." I stepped closer to the console, trying to anchor myself in data. The map of the ship pulsed once, twice, and corridors rearranged into a spiral leading toward the hold. Each phantom blinked out, then reappeared closer to us, as if the totem were drawing its rehearsal net tighter. The moon's rune trenches glowed faintly on the screen, their lightning bolts flickering like distant storms. I turned back to the prisoner. "Even if I wanted to release you, the manacles are sealed by gene lock." He laughed softly, a sound like rusted chains moving. "Gene locks mean nothing here. This ship has learned to open its own cages." As if to prove him right, the glow of his restraints flickered. The Mechanicus Adept stepped forward, raising his auspex. "Interrogator, energy surge." The manacles unlatched with a metallic sigh. Chains slid from the marine's wrists as though undone by invisible hands. My acolyte drew back, reliquary trembling. The psyker began to mutter the Emperor's creed, but the words came out backward. The loyalist marine rose slowly to his feet, stretching as if after a long confinement. "Too late," he murmured. "It wants a guide." He stepped backward into the shadow of a bulkhead. For an instant, his body seemed to merge with the metal, outlines blurring. Then he was gone, vanished without sound, leaving only a faint impression of heat on the deck where he had knelt. The Mechanicus Adept's Auspex shrieked. "No life sign detected," he gasped. "Subject not in any corridor." "He's inside." I stared at the empty corner, at the trembling condensation dripping from the consoles, at the map on the screen where a new phantom had appeared, shaped exactly like the prisoner, moving ahead of us through the labyrinth. My own reflection looked back from the display, eyes hollow, mouth open, as the ship's hum deepened into something like a heartbeat. The totem's maze was no longer rehearsing. It had begun to hunt. The hold had swollen since our last visit, its ceiling arching higher, its walls pulled outward as if the ship were stretching to make room for something larger. Frost smoked from the seams of the deck, and the violet lumen strips flickered weakly, unable to steady their light. In the center, the octagonal shrine no longer looked like an altar, but a wound, edges raw with glowing runes that crawled across the floor and up the pylons like living veins. The Mechanicus Adepts, 3 of them now, summoned from hidden chambers of the Eben Requiem, arranged themselves around the perimeter, their robes stiff with frost and their metal limbs clinking as they unpacked reliquaries and data sigils. They had come to contain what they would not name. I stood back with my acolyte and the psyker, both pale and trembling. The Night Lords ringed the chamber in a loose semicircle, silent as predators at a pit fight. Some watched the adepts with open contempt, fingers resting on bolters. Others stood very still, as if listening for a voice only they could hear. The air vibrated with a low hum, like a generator under strain but deeper, almost subsonic. My slate felt heavier than usual. Every time I tried to record, the screen fuzzed with a faint image of my own hands, moving a heartbeat out of sync. The adepts began their ritual. They placed hexagonal cog keys at the shrine's corners and connected them with threads of copper wire etched with Binharic scripture. One by one they intoned machine prayers, their voices rising and falling in harsh mechanical cadence. Sparks spat from their vox ports as they chanted. Incense of burning oils filled the air with a smell like scorched parchment and rusted gears. For a moment the runes around the shrine dimmed and the backward hymn inside the stasis field faltered. Then the octagon shifted. It did not break but reconfigured, the lines between the pylons twisting inward until the shape became a spiral, each coil inscribed with Nostraman glyphs. The copper threads snapped, lashing back into the adepts' faces. One reeled, vox grill venting static. Another's augmetic arms seized and locked at an angle. The third tried to complete his prayer, but his voice dissolved into Binharic shrieks. The Night Lords stirred. A sergeant barked a low order in their own dialect. 3 warriors moved toward the shrine, weapons ready. Another stepped in their path and raised a gauntlet. For the first time since boarding, I heard them argue, harsh vox bursts trading like claws raking metal. One faction demanded the relic be jettisoned into the void, their voices edged with fear they would never name. The other spoke of merging with it, of drawing Nostramo's last gift into themselves, of becoming the hunt made flesh. Their words crackled through my helm as broken fragments. Ascension, inheritance, never pray again. I tried to capture it on my slate, but the audio layered itself strangely. Every line I recorded played back as 3 voices, the present crew, the voices of those listed in the murder index, and a third choir I could not identify, deeper and slower, speaking a language like iron dragged over stone. The triple overlay built into a chord that made my teeth ache. Even my thoughts felt out of step. echoing a half-beat late in my skull. The psyker clutched her restraints and whispered, "It's writing them together. Past, present, and what hunts them." She rocked as if on the edge of a precipice. My acolyte had gone rigid, reliquary pressed to his chest, eyes fixed on the spiral as though hypnotized. In the center, the stasis field trembled. The relic's edges blurred, motes of dark light shedding from it like embers falling upward. I saw shapes flicker in the motes, winged forms, eyeless faces, victims running down Nostraman alleys that no longer existed. The adepts tried to reinforce the field, chanting faster, but their Binharik devolved into screaming code. One collapsed to his knees, steam venting from his augmetics. Another's eyes rolled back, pupils replaced by scrolling numerals counting backward from 8. The third raised both arms and began a last litany, only for his vox slit to spit a burst of white noise that froze him in place. The Night Lord's argument rose to a roar. Helm lenses flared. One lifted his bolter and aimed at the shrine. Another shoved it aside. Their voices braided into threats and promises. I caught fragments. Jettison now. Merge or die. It calls our gene seed, before the triple overlay swallowed their words entirely, leaving only a chorus of overlapping screams, prayers, and something like laughter. I pressed my palms to my ears, but it was inside my skull. The deck trembled, frost cracked underfoot. My slate flickered and displayed my own face, whispering along with the third choir. The psyker's restraints sparked, the metal glowing dull red. She hissed through clenched teeth, eyes staring into some darkness above us. "It's turning the ship," she said. "Spiral, we're in its coil now." Then gravity lurched. At first a tremor, then a sudden upward pull as though the deck had dropped away. Tools and reliquaries lifted off the floor. The Mechanicus adept still standing was yanked into the air, cables flailing like torn wings. My acolyte floated beside me, clutching his reliquary, mouth open in a silent shout. The Night Lords braced themselves with magnetic boots, but even they wavered, cape edges rising like black flames. In the heart of the hold, the relic tore free of its anchors. The stasis field cracked with a sound like ice breaking underfoot. Shards of opalescent light spun outward, each shard showing a moment of terror. A child screaming, a magistrate dying, a city burning. The black fragment of the terror totem rose slowly, spiraling upward, its etchings glowing like molten metal. The backward hymn swelled into a hunting cry that echoed from every surface of the ship. My slate spun out of my hand, tumbling weightless. The triple overlay became a single vast voice, speaking no word I knew but heavy with intent. I saw the Night Lords looking up at the levitating shard, some reaching toward it with gauntlets spread as if to embrace, others drawing weapons to destroy. The psyker's hair floated around her face like a dark halo. Her eyes rolled white and she whispered, "It's awake." A final crack tore through the hold as the stasis field collapsed completely. For an instant, everything was still. The relic suspended above us, runes blazing, gravity reversed, so we hung between deck and ceiling like offerings. Then the black shard pulsed once, shedding a wave of cold that snuffed the lumen strips and left only its glow. My last clear thought before the darkness closed was of the spiral etched into the deck beneath us, now complete, its coils converging directly beneath my drifting body. The hold erupted into motion the instant the relic pulsed. The Night Lords who had been arguing seconds before fell silent as the air grew dense and cold, an invisible pressure squeezing lungs and ears. Frost crystals burst from the walls like splinters of glass. I felt the name at the top of my mind, mine, slip sideways, as if someone had taken it from a shelf and put it in another room. When I tried to recall it, only fragments surfaced. Veil. Ardent. Interrogator. The syllables felt thin and foreign, like words learned in childhood and long forgotten. Shapes bled out of the relic's dark glow. At first they were only distortions, a shimmer like heat above scorched metal. Then they thickened into clawed echoes. Humanoid outlines blurred at the edges, faces featureless, but lit from within by a pale inner light. They moved with jerks and pauses, like puppets pulled by invisible strings, and wherever they passed the lumen strips flickered out, leaving trails of shadow. One drifted through a Mechanicus adept still kneeling on the deck. He convulsed but did not bleed. His eyes glazed, his hands stilled. And when I called his name, he looked at me with perfect emptiness, like a doll with the memory of being alive scraped clean. The phantoms moved faster, weaving between the Night Lords, who roared defiance and opened fire. Bolter shells ripped through the echoes without slowing them. Instead of wounds, the phantoms left gaps in the world, holes where sound dimmed and colour leached. A warrior's roar faltered mid-shout as one passed through him, and he dropped his weapon and stared at his gauntlets as though he no longer recognized what they were. The psyker screamed a warning, voice rising and falling like feedback, then clutched her head and curled into a ball as if protecting the last of herself from being pulled away. I forced myself to the nearest console, hoping telemetry could anchor me. Every screen glowed with the same image, the Nostroman litany etched on the hull when we first boarded, now burned across every display, each letter a coal of blue light. We hunt what flees. We remember what runs. The words pulsed like a heartbeat, in perfect rhythm with the relic's glow. My acolyte stumbled to my side, reliquary hanging useless in his grip. "Interrogator," he began, but the word dissolved halfway. He blinked at me in confusion. "Who?" His eyes were going blank. I grabbed his shoulder and shouted his name, but my own voice sounded muffled, my mouth shaping syllables that no longer held meaning. The memory of who he was slipped from me like water between fingers. The Night Lords were splitting again, even as they fought. One squad drew back toward the doors, chanting Binharic codes and forming a perimeter around the psyker, as if preparing to jettison the relic or themselves. Another squad advanced toward the levitating shard, with arms outstretched, voices rising in a hymn of their own. They welcomed the phantoms, letting the echoes pass through them, eyes rolling back as memories drained and were replaced by something else. Their movements grew less human, more fluid, like predators slipping into a new skin. I knew then I had to choose. Side with those trying to contain or destroy the relic, if such a thing was even possible, or attempt an exorcism alone, using the fragments of ritual knowledge drilled into me by the Ordo. My hands shook as I keyed emergency rights into the console, but the screen spat back my own face a moment younger, lips moving in reversed speech. The psyker lifted her head. "It's eating our names," she hissed. "Once you forget your name, it can wear you." She reached a trembling hand toward me. "Choose now." A phantom lunged across the deck, claws extended. I ducked. It passed just above me, and a curtain of memories peeled away. My first assignment, my home world, my training halls, gone in a breath. I staggered, clutching the edge of the console, fighting to hold on to anything. The litany on the screens blazed brighter, every word a spear of blue light driving into my vision. The Night Lords nearest the relic shouted something in Nostroman, a phrase repeated like a drumbeat. 8 becomes 1, 1 becomes 8. Their armor crackled with arcs of dark lightning. The other faction activated maglocks on the deck and began to drag the Mechanicus adepts toward the exit, their movements jerky but determined. One turned to me, helm lenses flaring. "Choose!" he roared, his voice cutting through the overlay like a blade. "Contain or ascend?" I tried to speak, but my mouth formed no words. My own name hovered just out of reach. In desperation, I slammed both palms on the console and recited the only prayer I still knew in full, a binding litany from the Catechism of the Silent. The words came out ragged but audible, echoing off the walls like hammer blows. For a heartbeat, the phantoms recoiled, edges blurring, and the litany on the screens flickered. But then the relic pulsed again, and the echoes surged back, claws outstretched. Gravity lurched. Not the slow reversal of before, but a violent flip. Everything in the hold lifted from the deck. Reliquaries, weapons, bodies. We floated upward as though the ceiling had become the floor. Frost and fragments of shattered pylons spiraled around us. My acolyte drifted past me, eyes wide, mouthing my name but no sound escaping. The relic hung at the center of the maelstrom, stasis field cracked in jagged lines, runes blazing. Through its glow, I saw flickers of every memory it had stolen. Faces of strangers, victims from the index, my own life in pieces. And behind all of it, for the briefest instant, a winged silhouette, vaster than the ship itself, its wings folded around the void like a cloak, waiting just beyond the veil of reality. Then the Geller field collapsed for 1 second. Every lumen died. The phantoms vanished. In the naked dark we all saw it. A shape outside the ship, impossibly large, wings of shadow stretched across the stars, head turning toward us. No eyes, only hollows, yet I felt its gaze pierce every cell of my body. It opened something like a mouth, and the void trembled as though preparing to swallow. The field snapped back with a thunderclap of light. Gravity slammed us toward the deck. The relic's glow dimmed but did not fade, its cracked stasis field sparking like a storm contained in glass. Around me the Night Lords lay where they had fallen, some laughing, some silent, some clutching their heads as if searching for their lost names. I lay gasping on the cold deck, a single thought hammering in the hollow where my name had been. The hunt had only begun. We followed the spiral deeper into the vessel, each turn of corridor more like a descent into memory than a passage through steel. The walls were slick with condensation that smelled of scorched parchment, and every lumen flickered as though breathing. My acolyte clutched his reliquary so hard his knuckles bled. The Psyker's restraints glowed dull red from the heat of her pulse. Even the Night Lords who guided us had fallen silent, their movements mechanical, as if they too were sleepwalking through a dream they had rehearsed 1,000 times. At the end of the spiral, a gate loomed, taller than any I had seen aboard the Ebon Requiem. Its surface was worked in black iron and bone-coloured inlay forming wings, folded downward, a vast predator poised to strike. As we approached, the door opened without command, splitting along a seam that exhaled a cold mist. Beyond lay the ship's heart, a sanctum shaped like an inverted cathedral. The ceiling rose into vaults that turned the wrong way, arches pointing downward like fangs, pillars tapering toward the deck as if inverted by some gravitational blasphemy. Lumens were few and far between. Most of the illumination came from the relic itself. It pulsed at the center of the sanctum, nested within a circle of chained captives. Their skin was pale and clammy, bodies wasted to bone, yet upright on their knees, arms stretched outward like supplicants in a grotesque benediction. Chains of black iron ran from their wrists into the deck, thrumming faintly with each pulse of the totem. They murmured without pause, a whispering choir of inverted prayers. Words of the Emperor's litanies turned inside out, syllables backward, yet still recognizable enough to make my teeth ache. I felt each phrase scrape across the inside of my skull like a claw. My acolyte pressed the reliquary to his ears, but the sound leaked through metal and flesh alike. The Psyker fell to one knee, trembling, eyes rolling white. I moved closer, driven by a mixture of horror and professional compulsion. The relic had grown since the hold. No longer a shard, but a jagged wing-shaped idol of black stone, etched with thousands of tally marks. Its glow was not light, but a pressure that beat against the chest. Around it, motes swirled like dark embers, rising from an unseen fire, each one showing a flicker of movement. A victim's face, a street in Nostramo, a winged silhouette dissolving into ash. The Mechanicus adept who had survived the containment attempt joined me at the edge of the circle, his augmetic limbs trembling as he scanned. "Not a weapon," he whispered. "A lure." He turned his flickering eyes to me. "It calls across the warp. Something forgotten, something older than this legion. The realization struck like a hammer. The murders in the Index, the phantoms, the ship's labyrinthine corridors, they were not trophies or hauntings. They were bait. The relic was weaving terror into a beacon, recreating Nostromo's crimes to draw back what had once stalked its alleys. If not destroyed or sealed, it would fuse with the Ebon Requiem, turning the strike cruiser into a living trap for whatever predator answered. My slate shook in my hands as I tried to record. Letters blurred and rewrote themselves as I typed, "Lure, not weapon. Lure, not weapon." My vox picked up only my own breath in ragged bursts. The captive's murmurs grew louder, synchronizing with the relic's pulse until the entire sanctum vibrated like a drum. Behind me, the Night Lords shifted. One of them whispered a prayer in Nostroman, voice trembling. Another dropped to a knee and pressed his palm to the deck, eyes closed. A third removed his helm and stared at the relic, as if recognizing a long-lost home. Their division had widened to a chasm, some wanting to destroy the shard, others longing to merge with it. The air between them quivered with unspoken threats. I stepped back, feeling the edges of my name fray again. "We have to break the circle," I told the Mechanicus Adept. "If it completes the lure, the ship is lost." He shook his head slowly. "Break the circle, and the predator will come anyway. We are already inside its mouth." The Psyker crawled forward until she lay at the edge of the circle, eyes wide and shining. "It's listening," she whispered. "It hears every breath, every heartbeat. It's hungry." She raised a trembling finger toward the captives. "They're its mouthpieces." I watched the captives more closely. Their lips moved, but their faces were blank. Eyes fixed on the relic, yet seeing nothing. The chains at their wrists pulsed faintly with light, a heartbeat echoing the totems. As I watched, one of the chains shuddered, a vibration running its length like something pulling from below. The Night Lords argued louder now, some drawing weapons, others lowering them. One faction began a ritual of their own, tracing claw marks on their armor, smearing their gauntlets with the condensation bleeding from the walls. The other raised bolters and aimed at the captives. Both sides looked to me without words, as if my choice would tip the balance. I took a step toward the relic, trying to speak, but my voice emerged as a whisper of reversed syllables. My name was gone. Again, only a hollow where it had been. All that remained was duty, to record, to bear witness, to try to end it. I raised the slate and keyed in an emergency glyph, hoping to send a warning to the spectre of Varan, but the display showed only a winged silhouette stretching claws across the screen. A deep creak rolled through the sanctum. The chains at the captive's wrists trembled more violently, rattling like bones in a sack. The Mechanicus Adept backed away, augmetic fingers making involuntary Binharic signs. "Interrogator," he rasped. "Containment impossible." The reliquary slipped from my acolyte's hands and spun across the deck. He lunged to catch it but froze halfway, staring at the captives as if seeing them for the first time. The inverted prayers ceased. The silence that followed was heavier than the chanting had been. The relic pulsed once, twice, like a heart preparing to beat faster. Then the chains snapped all at once with a sound like thunder. The captives rose in unison. Their eyes were blank, milky white without pupil or iris. Their mouths opened but no sound emerged, only a rush of cold air smelling of ash and old blood. They turned toward us together, movements perfectly synchronized, and stepped across the edge of the circle. The relic glowed brighter, casting their shadows like wings across the walls of the inverted cathedral. I felt the deck shift beneath my feet, as if gravity itself leaned toward them. The Night Lords raised weapons, some in awe, some in terror. I tried to remember my name to anchor myself, but the hollow inside me widened, and the only thing I could feel was the predator's attention turning toward us through their empty eyes. The first rumble came through the hull before any alarm could register. The ebon requiem shuddered, metal screaming as though each plank were alive and afraid. I clutched the edge of the inverted cathedral floor, feeling the pulse of the relic hammering against my chest. The captives had stopped moving, frozen mid-step, their blank eyes reflecting the growing light of a horror that had finally answered the lure. Outside, beyond the hull, the void itself seemed to split. Through the viewport, I glimpsed the shape that had been stalking us in whispers, a predator older than the Imperium's memory. It rose from the darkness like a tempest-made flesh, colossal wings spanning the circumference of the sanctum, bone and sinew entwined with lightning that danced in impossible patterns. Its face was an amalgam of avian terror and warp-born distortion, eyes glowing with a hunger that seemed to read the marrow of every living thing aboard. The air vibrated with its presence, and every sound became a chord in a song of annihilation. The Night Lords responded immediately, some hurling themselves into the predator's path with gleaming chainswords and plasma lances, others retreating into the shadows to feed fear through ritual as they had always done. I could see it. The predator did not attack them directly. Each act of terror, each calculated scream, each flinch and whispered prayer only made it grow stronger. The ship itself seemed to bend in obeisance to the creature, corridors elongating to funnel the predator toward the cathedral's heart. I backed against the nearest pillar, slate in hand, recording every impossible detail. My acolyte's face was pale beneath the helm, teeth gritted against the psychic pressure pressing down on the deck. The psyker had dropped to her knees, murmuring prayers I did not recognize, trying to hold some barrier between us and the predator, though the effort was clearly futile. Even the Night Lord's cohesion faltered, as though they had anticipated the lure's ultimate answer, but not its form. I remembered the protocol. It was forbidden, buried deep in inquisitorial archives, a scorched soul procedure designed to eradicate every memory aboard a vessel to starve warp entities. Activating it meant obliterating the minds of all crew, prisoners, and myself, leaving nothing but silence in the void. And yet, watching the predator fold reality around its wings, I understood there was no alternative. If it escaped, the predator would unmake everything the Imperium had touched in that sector, and the relic would remain a beacon for all eternity. My hands hovered over the activation glyph, slate trembling beneath my grasp. Outside, the predator flexed its wings, and the sound of thousands of phantoms, voices plucked from the murder index, roared in unison. The sanctum's floor warped beneath my feet, and I could feel the pressure of hundreds of eyes, both the captives and the predators, fixated upon me. Time seemed to slow. Every heartbeat, every flicker of the lumen, every whisper of the Night Lord's breaths was stretched into eternity. The first strike came from a Night Lord wielding a flensing blade, his figure launching across the sanctum like a comet. The predator absorbed the motion, feeding on the intent and fear, and the air shimmered as the energy coalesced into a visible current of psychic force. Another legionary joined, chanting an old ritual of nostrum and dread, and the combined terror bent reality further, twisting the pillars and vaults around us, as though the cathedral itself were collapsing inward. The predator's shadow stretched across every wall, a black tide swallowing the lumen's blue glow. I bit my lip, forcing myself to remember the incantation necessary to activate the Scorched Soul protocol. The symbols flared beneath my fingers, burning through the slate as though it were etched in living fire. I could feel the psychic resistance pressing back, tugging at my consciousness, threatening to erase me before I could act. My acolyte gasped, a reflex of fear I could not quell, and the psyker screamed a wordless warning. But I knew it was already too late for hesitation. The predator dipped its head, as if sensing the intent before me, and a sound, unlike any other, reached my mind, a wave of fear and hunger articulated in pure thought, bypassing words entirely. I could see my own memories, my own fears, projected into its mind, dissected, and catalogued for consumption. Childhood screams, every interrogation I had recorded, the faces of victims I had never met, they danced across the warp tide feeding its form. My stomach turned, bile rising as the scope of horror pressed inward. I pressed the glyph. A pulse erupted from the slate, pure and white, flowing through every conduit in the sanctum. The chains of the captives rattled violently, then snapped, though they did not rise again. The predator recoiled, wings folding, and I felt a tug at the edges of my mind, as if reality itself were tearing to accommodate the memory purge. The Night Lord's voices, the Psyker's chants, my acolytes' shouts, all were caught in the pulse, twisted into a white-hot void of unbeing. For an instant, silence prevailed. The relic's pulse stuttered, and the air grew still, almost breathable. I looked around, expecting the cathedral to be empty, the predator to be gone, the protocol to have succeeded. But nothing moved. The shadows clung to corners. The wings of the predator could still be seen beyond the viewport, blurred by the warp's shimmer. My own reflection stared back at me from the slate, expressionless and hollow. I could not feel my heartbeat. I could not recall my name fully. I staggered backward, slate still clutched, as a low vibration thrummed through the deck. The predator's wings shifted slightly, and for a moment it was impossible to tell if it had been hurt, stalled, or if my actions had only delayed it. The Night Lords were still frozen, some kneeling, some standing, some staring at the relic with reverence I could not comprehend. The Psyker's pulse flickered, augmenting the residual energy in the room. My acolyte whispered something, but the words dissolved into static before they reached my ears. I realized, in the core of my being, that the Scorched Soul protocol was a gamble that might have obliterated everything aboard, might have bought time, might have delayed the predator, but there was no certainty. Every indicator, every reading, every shred of superstition and doctrine I had memorized screamed that the creature could survive beyond our comprehension, nourished by the relic's warp resonance. And yet, if I had hesitated longer, the entire Ebon Requiem and its crew would have been lost in a single heartbeat, swept into a predator's maw that spanned the stars. I gripped the slate tighter, aware that if the protocol worked, I would not exist. My name would vanish, every memory, every word, every action reduced to psychic ash. But I also knew that the alternative was unthinkable. My consciousness flickered, as if dissolving, the relic pulsing with awareness of my decision. And then I felt the final tug, the pull toward oblivion as the pulse coursed outward, consuming every tether of identity aboard the ship, a white flare in the oppressive darkness. The last thing I registered before the emptiness swallowed me was the predator pausing, wings momentarily arrested in the void, its gaze fixed on the remnants of the pulse. I had triggered the device. Beyond that, there was no certainty. I did not know if the predator would be destroyed, driven away, or if my sacrifice had been enough. Only the lingering hum of the relic and the oppressive silence of the sanctum remained, a void of waiting, as the Ebon Requiem drifted in a space too vast and too dark to measure. And then, I understood that all that remained for me was the waiting, the unknown, and the grim truth, that in the immensity of the warp, the predator was patient, and I had only bought the smallest fraction of time. The spectre of Varan drifted in silence above the uncharted moon, its hull a muted witness to the devastation that had unfolded within the Ebon Requiem. No alarms sounded, no mechanized hum filled the corridors. Even the flicker of the lumen strips seemed hesitant, as if the ship itself feared to disturb the pervasive stillness. The air carried the faintest taste of ozone and burned resin, remnants of the Scorched Soul protocol the scribe had triggered. Around them, the surviving Night Lords wandered in aimless arcs, their armor distorted and featureless, the faces beneath the helms erased as if the predator had feasted upon identity itself. They whispered liturgies in languages the scribe did not recognize, a chorus of guttural lamentation that barely registered over the emptiness. The once ominous hum of the terror totem had dwindled to a thin vibration, more a shadow of sound than a presence, its octagonal stasis field dulled and inert. Yet the scribe did not dare approach it, not yet certain whether the relic slept, faked its dormancy, or merely waited to stir once more. Fragments of memory clawed at the edges of the scribe's consciousness. The Scorched Soul Protocol had done more than neutralize the predator. It had seared the logs, excised recollections, and left the scribe wandering through time as if stitched from incomplete threads. They leaned against a bulkhead, fingers tracing the engraved markings that had once dictated the ship's terror rituals, now hollowed into echoes of themselves. Pict feeds flickered, showing moments of the past mission, a shadow peeling along a corridor, the exalted champion's flayed visage, a whispering bulkhead reciting their name. Each fragment arrived fragmented, voices overlaying themselves in triple choruses, past victims, living crew, and the predator's own chorus merged into a dissonant symphony. The scribe forced their mind to catalogue each sight, each sound, each heartbeat, but comprehension slipped like water through iron fingers. They were memory and observer at once, trapped in a narrative collapsing upon itself. The moon below was motionless, yet the scribe could feel its latent influence through the ship's hull. Something had been called here, or perhaps summoned inadvertently by the predator's breach. The Auspex read nothing yet recorded everything, minute distortions in gravitic flux, imperceptible resonances across the hull plating, and the faintest infrared traces of figures that could not exist outside the mind. Shadows of previous victims flickered across the decks, refusing to interact with anything physical, yet their gaze pressed into the scribe's skull, relentless in accusation. A whisper threaded through the voxnet, impossibly clear and direct. You remember nothing, yet it all watches. The words carried no origin, but sounded as though they had come from the scribe's own tongue, echoing the void left where their identity once had anchored itself. The remaining Night Lords drifted closer, their helm lenses dim and featureless, armor creaking in gentle protest against the weight of emptiness. One approached, extending a gauntleted hand, then paused, frozen mid-gesture as if reconsidering the definition of existence itself. The scribe did not move. Motion seemed futile, as if any action might dissolve the fragile equilibrium the Scorched Soul Protocol had created. Around the ship, the relic's surface reflected muted lights, casting fractured visions across the corridors. Imperial worlds yet untouched, cities at peace, unaware of the horrors once unleashed, and in one pane, a flicker of the scribe's own form, so incomplete it might have been a mask of someone else entirely. They stepped closer to the reflection, seeking reassurance in the mirrored semblance of self, but the surface rippled and the image fragmented, denying any certainty. Identity had become a question without answer, a riddle posed by the void and the predator alike. In the control sanctum, the comms console crackled faintly, drawing the scribe's attention. The display showed no channels, no active frequencies, yet a single vox ping blinked insistently from the moon below. They approached, eyes narrowing on the readout, and the signal resolved into a voice, clear and unmistakable. It spoke their full name and clearance code. The scribe's heart stuttered, not from recognition, but from the implausibility of such a transmission. Nothing known could send a signal of that specificity across the void without infrastructure, without permission, without the machinery of a functioning empire. And yet it came, precise and intimate, as if the moon itself had learned the scribe's identity, catalogued it, and demanded response. They hesitated, unsure if the broadcast was a summons, a trap, or the final fragment of some memory the predator had failed to consume. The corridors shivered as if the ship breathed, a gentle resonance that might have been life, or might have been the residual echo of a creature whose existence defied comprehension. The scribe felt the pull of the predator's absence, a hollow pressure that suggested not defeat, but merely displacement. The Night Lords had been emptied of faces, of agency, wandering phantoms in a cathedral of steel. And yet, in their blank eyes, the scribe glimpsed a trace of anticipation, a lingering promise that the Predator's influence had not entirely ended. Perhaps it waited for a new host, or perhaps it had merely retreated, patient in the warp currents that laced the void. The scribe knew only that silence had not healed, only that memory had been rent to make space for something vast and unknowable. They recorded their observations on the remaining functional slate, each word a tether to the fragments of self that still clung to consciousness. Pict feeds captured nothing, just blank corridors and wandering, faceless figures. The scribe's voice, recorded through the Vox, sounded alien even to themselves, layered with echoes of every prior interaction aboard the ship. They spoke of the Scorched Soul Protocol, of the Predator, of the relic now inert, and of the Night Lords who no longer could be called soldiers. Each sentence felt simultaneously a confession and a memorial, an effort to preserve continuity against the encroaching entropy of identity. They paused at intervals, listening for response, for interference, for proof that they still inhabited the same universe, but the only reply came from the Vox ping, steady and patient, emanating from the moon below. The scribe moved to the viewport, peering at the moon's surface, barren yet strange, the ruins below hinting at ritualistic geometry too vast to discern at a glance. Patterns etched into regolith glinted faintly, possibly remnants of the Predator's influence, or a call awaiting fulfillment. In the reflection, the scribe saw the fragmented remnants of themselves, a figure half remembered, half imagined, staring back. They understood the precariousness of their situation, no longer fully present, memory shattered, companions erased, and yet still tethered to duty by the faint, persistent pulse of their own name across the void. And as they recorded the final line into the slate, they paused, hearing the whispered liturgy of the Night Lords behind them, a sound without source, a rhythm without body, and the insistent Vox ping from the moon, repeating, patient, intimate, "You are known, you are required." The shuttle's landing skidded across the moon's brittle surface, raising a fine cloud of ash that smelled faintly of burnt parchment and ozone. The spectre of Varan remained above, a silent observer, its hull reflecting the pale light of a distant sun. The scribe descended alone, leaving the faceless remnants of the Night Lords drifting in the void behind them. Every step crunching across the regolith reminded them of absence, of companions erased, of identity shredded, of memories that no longer belonged entirely to them. Yet something in the air insisted they were being followed, that their shadow, too fragmented to hold form, still marked them for observation. The Vox ping from the moon persisted faintly in their mind, a pulse more felt than heard, repeating their name, their clearance, their existence, as if the moon itself catalogued them before they even moved. The ruins ahead, skeletal echoes of Nostraman architecture, rose jagged against the ashen horizon, whispering of terrors both ancient and immediate. Within the largest of the crypts, the scribes saw themselves, or rather, a version that seemed impossibly real, carved from the memory of Nostromo itself. The figure stood in the center, framed by the fractured light of broken stained glass windows, holding the relic aloft as if it were a crown of unbroken dominion. Its face was exactly theirs, down to the imperceptible twitch of the eye, yet unnervingly calm, untouched by the fractures of memory that had battered the scribe. The relic, nested in the figure's grasp, pulsed faintly, a heartbeat of inverted sound and color that seemed to resonate through the scribe's chest, rattling bones they had thought themselves alone enough to bear. Every ritual etching, every warp-infused marking on the relic's surface shimmered with purpose, reflecting the scribe's fragmented log entries across its obsidian sheen. When the figure spoke, it did so in perfect cadence with the last entry the scribe had recorded aboard the Eben Requiem, each syllable precise, deliberate, echoing in the scribe's mind, like a litany of inevitability. "You are here," it intoned, Because the predator demanded coordinates. You carried the map of Imperial space within you, whether you remembered or not. Every step, every action was catalogued. The words were calm, but impossible to resist, resonating across the lunar silence as though spoken simultaneously by both the figure and the scribe's own fragmented consciousness. Time stretched, pulled taut across memory and reality, until the scribe could no longer discern the moment of arrival from the moment of observation. Their eyes traced the wings of the totem, folded now but coiled with latent menace, as if it could unfurl at the slightest summons and consume everything the scribe had left unclaimed. The air carried a chill, one not of temperature, but of anticipation, the kind that grips the chest with subtle insistence and whispers of unseen predators in distant voids. The scribe's own shadow stretched unnaturally across the stone floor of the crypt, twisting as though it had a weight and life independent of its host. They stepped closer to the Nostrum self, observing the meticulous care with which it held the relic. The fingers splayed just enough to suggest control without dominance, the posture exact, the expression a mirror of calm inevitability. And yet, the figure's eyes glimmered with a knowing hunger, a certainty that the scribe could never hope to satisfy. The predator had not been destroyed, it had not been banished. It had only shifted carriers, transferring its imperative through time, space, and memory until the scribe, unwitting, incomplete, fragmented, had delivered the coordinates across the void. The thought gnawed like a warp-born rat at the edges of reason. Every imperial system within reach, now marked, now catalogued, now vulnerable to a predator older than the stars themselves. As the scribe approached, the Nostrum self began to step back, moving along a path lined with ancestral tombs, each etched with heraldry of those lost to Nostrum purges centuries prior. The relic's wings began to unfurl slowly, skeletal and lit with a shadowed luminescence that seemed alive, reaching upward toward the stars like a conduit between void and mortal plane. The scribe felt the pull, a quiet gravity of inevitability that tugged at their very being. They wanted to resist, to take the relic and destroy it, to reclaim fragments of self and log. But the predator's influence, catalogued across both physical and psychic space, made hesitation impossible. Choice itself became a pale mockery. The only movement left was to observe, to record, and to obey the unspoken command that had always been embedded in the warp's cruel rhythm. Carry, mark, do not return. The Nostrum figure paused at the edge of the crypt, the relic raised in a gesture both ritual and casual, as if greeting stars only it could see. The scribe's shadow elongated, fingers stretching toward the wings, tethering them to the void, to the predator, to the mission that had begun aboard the Eben Requiem and ended here, in silence and ash. The reflection of self, perfect and complete, and the fragmentary observer of memories intertwined in a tableau of inevitability. In that moment, the scribe understood that the predator's purpose had never been containment or destruction. It had been propagation, mapping the expanse of imperial space for the slow, inevitable consumption of fear. Every step, every record, every flicker of identity had been accounted for. Their existence was no longer their own. It had become part of a ledger too vast to comprehend, a record etched into warp and void alike. And yet within the silence, a final instruction lingered in the air, a directive encoded across memory, echo, and instinct. Mark coordinates. Do not return. The words were neither order nor suggestion. They were inevitability made manifest. The scribe, fractured and incomplete, stepped back and allowed the Nostrum self to move forward, the wings of the totem unfurling fully, brushing the lunar surface with shadows of blackened light. The crypt seemed to inhale, a sigh that reverberated through stone and bone alike. As the figure disappeared toward the horizon, turning to face the stars, the scribe watched their own shadow stretch upward, reaching, tethered to a fate they could not alter. The moon was silent. The stars were indifferent. And the predator waited, coordinates etched into the fragile veneer of imperial order. Patient, eternal, and hungry.